July 1944, Central Germany. Test pilot Hans-Werner Löscher walked toward Hangar 7 with a sense of restrained curiosity. Above him, broken skylights let narrow shafts of light cut through the dust and smoke, illuminating an aircraft unlike any he had seen before. Under those fractured beams stood a captured American fighter, a Vought F4U Corsair. Its inverted gull wings and elongated nose gave it the appearance of a predator ready to strike. 3 weeks earlier, it had arrived from Norway, brought by ship after a forced landing near Bodø. Tail number JT404, Royal Navy. Löscher had already flown and evaluated dozens of captured Allied planes, Spitfires, P-47 Thunderbolts, even a B-17. But this machine was different. Its reputation had travelled from the Pacific Front. The Japanese called it Whistling Death, a name earned from the haunting sound its engine made in a dive. The Luftwaffe command wanted answers. Could this American naval fighter match their FW-190 or BF-109? Where were its weak spots? And what exactly made it so feared? July 18, 1944, over occupied Norway, near the port city of Bodø. Lieutenant Matterley of the Royal Navy was piloting Corsair JT404 on a recon mission when the engine began to sputter. Fuel system failure. He had two choices: try to reach the carrier HMS Formidable in the Norwegian Sea, or find a place to land. He chose the latter, safer than ditching into the violent waves. He spotted a flat patch of land outside Bodø and brought the plane down hard, but under control. The Corsair survived the landing almost intact. The pilot smashed the radio and tried to ignite the cockpit, but German troops arrived too quickly. For them, it was an unbelievable stroke of luck, a near-perfect capture. Only minor damage to the landing gear and fuel system, repairable. And this was an F4U-1A, the latest model with a raised cockpit offering far better visibility than its predecessors. The local Wehrmacht command contacted Berlin immediately. Orders came swiftly. Move the Corsair to Germany for evaluation. No delays. But the plane couldn't fly. Its fuel system was beyond field repair, and the parts didn't exist in Germany. Disassembling it for transport would take weeks, so they took a risk, loaded it onto a ship at Narvik, and sailed it south to Germany, then by rail to Rechlin. 18 days later, on August 5, 1944, the Corsair arrived, its metal skin salt-stained and pitted with corrosion, but otherwise intact. With repairs, it could fly. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring personally authorized the test. By then, the Luftwaffe was bleeding air superiority over Europe. American Mustangs and Thunderbolts were tearing through its formations. If the Corsair was to join the European theatre, they needed to know how to fight it. The task fell to Löscher. At just 27, he was already one of Rechlin's most experienced test pilots. Over 60 types flown, 25 of them Allied designs. His reports were factual, technical, and unflinchingly honest. But the Corsair posed a unique challenge. Unlike the Spitfire or P-47, German pilots had never faced it in combat. All they knew came from Japanese dispatches in the Pacific, reports that described the Corsair as nearly invincible in the right hands. For 2 days, Löscher studied it on the ground. The engineering impressed him. The inverted gull wing layout allowed a shorter, sturdier landing gear while keeping ample propeller clearance. The F4 U-1A's raised cockpit offered better forward view than previous versions. 6.50 caliber machine guns, 400 rounds each. A formidable arsenal. But specs meant little without flight. He needed to feel it in the air. The test flight was set for August 8, 1944. Blue skies, light winds, perfect conditions. At 0600 hours, Löscher stood again before Hangar 7. The crew had checked everything. Fuel tanks full, systems green. He climbed into the cockpit and instantly noticed how different it was from any German fighter. The seat sat higher, offering a commanding view over the Corsair's long nose. The control stick was centered, not offset, like in the BF-109. The instruments were logical, intuitive. He pressed the starter. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp came alive with a deafening roar, 2,000 horsepower, nearly double that of the Messerschmitt's Daimler-Benz. The entire airframe shuddered under the force. Löscher taxied to the runway, weaving side to side to see past the nose, a trick he'd learned from interrogated American pilots. At the threshold, he pushed the throttle forward. The Corsair lunged ahead, tail up in seconds, At 80 knots, he pulled back. The plane leapt skyward. Levelling off at 3,000 metres, he began his evaluation. First, handling. A gentle bank left, then right. Smooth responses, but heavy at low speed, just as the Japanese had reported the Corsair was not a tight turner. Next, acceleration. He opened the throttle fully and watched the airspeed climb. 300 knots, 350, 400. At 420 knots, about 485 miles per hour, he eased off the German FW 190A-8, barely touched 408 miles per hour. Already, the advantage was obvious. Then came the third test, the one that would redefine his understanding of air combat. He climbed to 6,000 metres and initiated a series of vertical manoeuvres. Full throttle, sharp pull, a zoom climb to see how far momentum could carry the plane. The Corsair shot up like a rocket. The altimeter spun, 6,500, 7,000, 7,500 metres. It finally stalled at 8,200, a 1,200 metre gain on pure energy. He tried again, this time starting from a dive. Rolling inverted, he dropped steeply, accelerated to 450 knots, then pulled hard upward. The G-forces crushed him into the seat. The Corsair groaned but held firm. 8,000, 8,500, 9,000 metres, and finally a stall at 10,400 metres, over 34,000 feet. That was the moment of truth. The Corsair wasn't built for low-speed dogfights like a Spitfire or Bf-109. It was a vertical fighter, a machine for boom and zoom tactics, dive from above, strike and climb away. No German fighter could match that kind of energy. At altitude, Lercher steadied the controls and began noting details. The seat position gave him superb forward visibility over that long nose, far better than any German cockpit he knew. The stick placement felt natural, centered between his knees, not offset like in the Messerschmitts. The instruments were crisp, logically arranged. When he advanced the throttle again, the Pratt & Whitney engine responded instantly, the whole aircraft trembling with the force of 2,000 horses. It was raw power, tamed by engineering. Taxiing earlier, he'd learned the Corsair's most peculiar trait. The nose completely blocked the runway view. You had to weave, snake-like, just to see ahead. But now, airborne and free, the aircraft felt alive. At 3,000 metres, he began systematic testing. Roll left, roll right. The Corsair obeyed, but the controls were heavy at low speed, sluggish compared with the nimble FW 190 that matched Japanese intelligence. It wasn't meant for slow-speed turning duels. Acceleration next. Lercher slammed the throttle open. The speed indicator climbed relentlessly. 300 knots, 350, 400, still rising. At 420 knots, roughly 485 miles per hour, he eased back. That was faster than the Luftwaffe's frontline FW 190A-8 could ever dream of. But it was the vertical climb that told the real story. Lercher pulled up sharply, testing energy retention. The Corsair climbed with brutal grace altimeter, 6,500 metres, 7,000, 7,500, then 8,200 before the stall break. Momentum alone had carried it more than a kilometre upward. He repeated the test from a dive. Inverted roll, steep descent, throttle wide open. At 450 knots, he pulled hard into the vertical. The G-forces pressed him deep into the seat. The airframe moaned, metal strained, but held. 8,000, 8,500, 9,000 metres. The stall didn't come until 10,400, 34,000 feet. That was revelation. The Corsair wasn't crafted for swirling horizontal dogfights. It was built for altitude, for hit-and-run warfare in 3 dimensions, dive, strike, and climb back before your enemy could blink. Boom and zoom. Its R2-800 engine gave it the power to choose the terms of battle, something no German design could match. Lercher decided to test this doctrine. He simulated a combat run, dive from 7,000 to 4,000 metres at maximum speed, pull out, then climb back to start. The descent was violent. Airspeed passed 500 knots, 575 miles per hour. The frame shuddered, wings humming from compression, but stayed stable. At 4,000 metres, he hauled back on the stick. 6 Gs slammed his body, vision tunnelled, colours narrowed, but the Corsair held steady. Then the climb, full throttle. The aircraft surged upward as though pulled by an invisible hand. Stopwatch running. From 4,000 to 7,000 metres, 2 minutes, 40 seconds. He compared that to the FW190A8's record, 4 minutes 15 seconds, 40% slower. The conclusion hit him immediately. If American pilots in Europe ever flew the Corsair using vertical tactics, the Luftwaffe would face disaster. The Bf-109 and FW-190 were designed for flat plane turns. They could outturn the Corsair only in that narrow regime. But if the American fighter stayed fast, fought vertical, it would be untouchable. Lerche tested the guns. Rolling into a 30-degree dive, he aimed at a ground target and squeezed the trigger. 6.50 caliber Brownings roared in unison. The recoil felt gentle, the airframe barely shook. The gun sight stayed rock steady. He thought of the FW-190's weapons, 2 13mm machine guns and 4 20mm cannons. Tremendous firepower, but heavy recoil that ruined accuracy in high-speed attacks. The Corsair's smaller rounds delivered less impact per hit, yet its stability meant far more on-target strikes. After 35 minutes aloft, Lerche had his preliminary notes. But one question remained, the ultimate test of its energy advantage. He climbed again to 7,000 meters and prepared a simulated battle scenario. A Corsair dives on a German formation. The defenders break apart. The attacker overshoots, climbs away to safety. The question, how long before a pursuing FW-190 could regain altitude and re-engage? He rolled inverted and dove, building to 480 knots. Pull out at 4,000 meters. The impact pressed him into the harness, grey edges closing around his vision. The Corsair groaned, but stayed whole. At the bottom, he slammed full throttle and began the climb. 130 knots indicated, the engine howling stopwatch ticking. At 5,000 meters, 1 minute 15 seconds. 6,000 meters, 2 minutes 20 seconds. 7,000 meters, 3 minutes 35 seconds. He leveled off, checked fuel and scribbled the numbers. 2 months earlier, the same test in an FW-190A8 had taken 5 minutes 50 seconds. The difference was staggering. Lerche sat there in the cockpit, the numbers echoing in his head. 2 minutes and 15 seconds faster. In aerial combat, that gap was an eternity, the line between hunter and hunted. But beyond the stopwatch, he grasped something deeper. The Corsair's energy advantage created a tactical trap for German pilots. Chase it, and you'd burn altitude and fuel trying to catch an aircraft that was always faster. Refuse the chase, and it would climb away, regroup, and dive again at will. Either choice led to defeat. He'd seen echoes of this problem before in Eastern Front reports. Soviet pilots flying American Lend-Lease P-39 Airacobras had used hit-and-zoom tactics against Bf-109s. But the Airacobra's performance edge was marginal. The Corsair's superiority was absolute. He decided to simulate a defensive situation, the inverse scenario. What if a Corsair were attacked from above by a FW-190? Rolling level, he pulled the stick hard left, executing a defensive brake. The controls resisted, heavy, reluctant. The Corsair's turn rate was mediocre, sluggish, compared to the agile German fighter in a real duel. That first move would give the FW-190 a brief firing solution. Then he tried what a seasoned American pilot would do. Wings level, throttled to the stops. The R2800 roared. The Corsair leapt forward, 300 knots, 350, 400. At 420 knots, he eased into a climbing turn, not tight, but clean, preserving momentum. 15 seconds after the break, he looked back. The imaginary attacker was gone. The FW-190 would have had maybe 3 seconds of firing time before the Corsair vanished out of range, already rising toward the clouds. If the German pilot dared to follow, he'd stall out first, hanging helplessly beneath a faster, higher adversary, ready to dive again. Lerche understood then why the Japanese had named it Whistling Death. The nickname wasn't about the sound alone, it was about inevitability. A properly flown Corsair couldn't be forced into an even fight. It dictated every engagement. Still, no machine was flawless. For the next 10 minutes, he hunted for weaknesses. He tested slow speed handling. Below 150 knots, the Corsair became heavy, its ailerons stubborn. Rolling took muscle. In a low-speed scissors duel, a twisting, energy-bleeding dance, a FW-190 or Bf-109 would win easily. The trick was forcing the Corsair into that trap, and a disciplined pilot never would. Next came stall behaviour. He raised the nose, watching the speed bleed away. At 85 knots, the left wing snapped down violently. A vicious stall with almost no warning. The plane rolled inverted before he could react. He recovered quickly, but the lesson was burned in his mind. Never slow down in combat. Visibility came next. The raised cockpit helped, but the long nose still hid everything directly forward and below. A German pilot could slip into that blind spot during a turn and stay invisible. But again, only if the Corsair turned. If it fought vertically, the blind spot was irrelevant. Finally, the dive test. Nose down, throttle open, 450 knots. 480, 500. At 520 knots, over 600 miles per hour, the controls grew lead-heavy. The plane wanted to keep diving. Pulling out took both hands and full strength. Misjudge that pull-out, and a pilot could black out or tear the wings off. It was a limitation, yes, but not a fatal one. The FW190 suffered similar compression at high speed. The Corsair simply reached that edge faster, meaning its pilot could use shallower dives and still retain an advantage. After 45 minutes aloft, Lersch throttled back. Time to land. As he descended toward Rechlin, Lersch's mind was already assembling the report. Each test, each number painted a single, unsettling picture. The F4U Corsair wasn't just another Allied fighter. It represented a new philosophy of air combat. He weaved side to side on approach, the long nose blocking his view of the runway until the final seconds. The landing was smooth. 7:45 hours, mechanics rushed in as soon as the propeller wound down, checking the undercarriage and wings for stress damage. Nothing. The machine was as solid as when it took off. Without removing his flight gear, Lersch walked straight to the technical office. For 3 hours he wrote line after line, formula after formula, 14 pages of observations, measurements, and implications. The conclusion was uncompromising. The vowed F4U Corsair marks a fundamental departure in fighter design. It is not optimized for turning combat. Its doctrine is built on energy, speed, climb rate, and momentum. Against this aircraft, existing Luftwaffe tactics are insufficient. He laid out the figures. Maximum speed, over 420 knots at sea level, exceeding 485 miles per hour, 15% faster than the FW190A-8. Climb rate, 40% superior in the combat climb profile. Energy retention, exceptional, capable of repeated boom and zoom attacks without serious altitude loss. Armament, 6.50 caliber machine guns, stable firing platform, consistent accuracy. Weaknesses, poor low-speed handling, heavy controls, sharp stall, limited forward visibility. Then came the section that would ignite controversy, recommended defensive tactics against the F4U Corsair. He wrote, avoid engagement whenever possible. Its energy advantage makes it nearly impossible to defeat in standard combat. If forced to fight, slow it down. Force a turning battle where German aircraft retain an edge. Never chase a Corsair in a climb or dive. It will outpace you and you'll become a target. Exploit its nose blind spot, but only if it commits to a turn. Attack only with a significant altitude advantage, at least 1,500 meters. Even then, expect it to escape if the pilot knows what he's doing. The summary line was brutal. The F4U Corsair is superior to all current German fighters in the energy fighting regime. If introduced to the European theatre in large numbers, it would pose a severe threat to Luftwaffe operations. Lersch signed his name, dated it, and sent it up the chain of command. He already knew what awaited him. 3 days later, he was summoned to Berlin. The meeting was stiff, the air heavy with cigar smoke and restrained anger. A general staff officer, Lersch never caught his name, picked apart his conclusions point by point. Are you certain of these speeds? Are you suggesting Allied aircraft have surpassed German engineering? Did you consider that the captured model might have been modified? Are you aware your report contradicts Pacific intelligence? Lersch didn't flinch. His voice was calm. The data was sound. He'd tested the aircraft himself. If anything, his results underestimated its potential. The officer leaned back, tone cold. Your technical notes are appreciated, but your tactical conclusions are premature. The Corsair is a naval aircraft. It will not appear over Europe. This report will remain classified, distribution on a need-to-know basis only. In that moment, Lersch understood. His report wasn't being reviewed, it was being buried. Not because it was wrong, but because it was right. He returned to Rechlin in silence. Over the next 6 months, he tested 14 more captured Allied aircraft. Each new report whispered the same truth. Germany was losing the technological war. Still, his Corsair findings refused to die. Copies circulated quietly between Luftwaffe squadrons, shared by pilots through unofficial channels. The truths that High Command didn't want to acknowledge. By late 1944, many German aviators who had never seen a Corsair already knew its capabilities and its weaknesses. It didn't matter. The aircraft never arrived in Europe in significant numbers. It remained a weapon of the Pacific, dominating there exactly as Löscher had predicted. The irony wasn't lost on Hans-Werner Löscher. He had uncovered the truth about one of the deadliest fighters ever built. And yet, that truth changed nothing. By April 1945, with Soviet forces closing in on Rechlin, Löscher fled west. He surrendered to American troops and was quickly recognized for what he was. Not a combat pilot, but a technical asset. Within weeks, the same air forces he had analyzed were now recruiting him to do the opposite. Test captured German aircraft for the Allies. The roles had reversed. In the years after the war, Löscher continued his work, documenting everything he had flown. In 1956, his memoir Luftwaffe Test Pilot was published, a meticulous account of his wartime evaluations, including the Corsair historians would later call it one of the most valuable first-hand records of comparative aviation performance from the Second World War. He never lost his fascination with that American fighter. In interviews decades later, he still described the Corsair as the most impressive aircraft I ever flew, and I flew more than 60 types. He admired its philosophy: build an aircraft around a doctrine, energy fighting, and execute that doctrine without compromise. History vindicated his judgment. In the Pacific, the Corsair achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft. Navy and Marine pilots who flew it regarded it as the finest fighter of the entire war. Whistling Death had earned its name. Yet Löscher's report carried a deeper lesson, one that went beyond engineering or combat. He had delivered clear, factual intelligence, a warning backed by evidence, and the Luftwaffe had ignored it. Not because it lacked merit, but because it clashed with institutional pride and denial. Throughout 1944 and 1945, this pattern repeated across the German war machine. Officers who spoke truth were branded defeatists. Analysts who delivered unwelcome data saw their work buried. Commanders clung to illusions long after the facts had turned against them. The result was paralysis. Decisions built on hope rather than reality. Löscher's 45-minute Corsair flight became a symbol of that blindness. One pilot, one test, 14 pages of honest observation, dismissed because the truth was inconvenient. And yet, that report outlived the regime that suppressed it. The lesson remains universal. In any institution, military, political, corporate, survival depends on the courage to confront uncomfortable facts, to face what is, rather than what one wishes to be. Hans-Werner Löscher provided that truth. The Luftwaffe chose denial. He died in 1993 at the age of 75. His legacy endures not through victories or ranks, but through clarity, the rare discipline of seeing things exactly as they are. He flew the Corsair only once, for 45 minutes, on an August morning in 1944. But that was enough. Courage isn't defiance. It's refusing to look away.